Welcome back to the 2022 Ingenium Professional Development Seminars. On behalf of Engineers Geoscientists Manitoba, I am Siwen, a member of Ingenium Task Group, and I will be the moderator for this session. Throughout today's presentations, we encourage you to send in any question you may have for the presenters via the chat box. Please note this presentation is being recorded and will be available through the Ingenium Hub from tomorrow until January. It is now my great pleasure to welcome our presenters for this session, Janelle, Harper, and Melanie Chatfield, who are joining us from the city of Winnipeg. Janelle, it's over to you.
Hello, thank you for joining this morning. The presentation we will be discussing today is related to the importance of measurement. All questions can be popped into the chat and we'll be answering those at the end of the presentation. Next slide, please. Through the presentation, we'll be focusing on the Building Energy Disclosure Project, the City of Winnipeg's Energy Star Portfolio Manager, retro commissioning, and the city's building management system. Next slide, please. Before we get into the Building Energy Disclosure Project, I would like to discuss what energy benchmarking, labeling, and disclosure is, as well as the benefits of this type of programming. Energy benchmarking is the ongoing review and comparison of a building's energy consumption to determine its level of performance. An energy label is a rating that indicates a building's energy performance compared to similar buildings, as determined through benchmarking. Disclosure involves the reporting of the energy performance to other jurisdictions or to the public. Next slide, please. As buildings account for the second largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in the city of Winnipeg, with transportation being the largest, improving the energy efficiency of existing buildings is a crucial step in helping the city meet GHG emission reduction targets and climate action goals as defined in the Winnipeg Climate Action Plan and our Winnipeg 2045. Supporting energy benchmarking and disclosure is one way that jurisdictions, such as the city, can help organizations identify, develop, and implement energy efficiency improvement opportunities in their buildings and reduce their GHG emissions. The need for energy benchmarking relates to the fundamental principle that to effectively reduce energy use and greenhouse gas emissions associated with the built environment, we must first be able to measure it. When information on building energy performance is collected and publicly disclosed, it can become a powerful tool that can help stakeholders in different ways. These include setting a baseline, which allows operators and owners to set a baseline of actual performance in comparison to industry best performance, which in turn helps them to identify operational efficiency and improvements, reduce GHG emissions, and meet environmental targets. Secondly, monitor buildings. This enables policymakers and regulators to monitor how buildings across their jurisdictions are performing, assess the impacts of energy and emissions policies, identify effective ways to promote building performance improvements, and to help determine the levels of performance that are achievable for different building types. And lastly, improve energy use literacy. Disclosure programs can also improve energy use literacy for the public. Having access to building performance data allows community members to make more informed choices about where to buy or lease based on energy use and emissions efficiencies and expected energy costs, allowing them to select a building or space that aligns with their environmental values and cost expectations. Next slide, please. The Winnipeg Climate Action Plan was adopted by Council in September 2018. The plan addresses community challenges and opportunities with respect to global climate change, offers targets for emissions reductions, and provides recommendations for new and enhanced policies, programs, and actions. The climate action targets identified in the Winnipeg Climate Action Plan are a 20% reduction in GHG emissions by 2030 relative to 2011 levels, as provided in Winnipeg's 2011 Community Greenhouse Gas Inventory and Forecast, as well as a target of an 80% reduction in GHG emissions by 2050 relative to 2011 levels. There is a total of 7 strategic opportunities identified in the Winnipeg Climate Action Plan. Strategic opportunity number 5 focuses on low carbon and energy efficient buildings. Through this strategic opportunity, there are a number of key directions and actions identified. Key direction 5.1 focuses on increasing the performance of existing buildings. This key direction identifies 2 short-term actions relative to the Building Energy Disclosure Project. Next slide, please. Those 2 short-term actions are identified on the slide here. As part of the commitment to the Winnipeg Climate Action Plan and the actions identified, the City of Winnipeg created the Building Energy Disclosure Project. Launched in 2020, this initiative is aimed at helping Winnipeg's commercial and institutional building owners better understand the energy performance of their buildings while supporting overall reductions in GHG emissions and energy consumption. The project also aims to showcase leadership efforts by building owners to support low carbon and energy efficient buildings in our community, demonstrate industry and institutional support for data transparency in Winnipeg, and for the development of a centralized and accessible database, and lastly, support the further development of industry disclosure and benchmarking knowledge and capacity to help prepare organizations and building owners for possible future federal and/or provincial disclosure requirements as identified in the Pan-Canadian Framework on Climate Change. Next slide, please. For a building to be eligible to participate in the Building Energy Disclosure Project, it must be located within City of Winnipeg limits. This is defined using the legal boundary of the City of Winnipeg. The building must also be at least 20,000 square feet or 1858 square meters in size. Buildings that are smaller than this may be accepted and are reviewed on a building by building basis. The building must also fall under a commercial or institutional building type. A commercial building type is identified as any privately owned building, primarily used for business operations and activities. Commercial buildings usually refer to buildings that house businesses, as well as larger residential properties. Institutional buildings refer to any structure that fulfills a role related to education, government operations, healthcare, and recreation. Accepted commercial and institutional property building types are listed on the slide, in the table on the slide here. Categorizations in the table are based on building types that have a similar functional nature and/or close median energy use intensities, often referred to as EUIs. And this is based on the Canadian Energy Use Intensity by Property Type Guidance, which is provided by the Energy Star Portfolio Manager. EUI is the energy per square foot at a property and enables you to compare different size buildings. Next slide, please. There's a total of 15 organizations that have participated in the Building Energy Disclosure Project to date. These are listed in the side of the slide here. We're always looking to grow participation in the project. Registration can be done directly through the landing page for the Building Energy Disclosure Project on the City of Winnipeg's website. Participating organizations provide read-only access to the building's profile and energy information on Energy Star Portfolio Manager. Participating building types are also identified on this slide here. There are currently 161 buildings as part of the project, with about 680,000 square meters of floor space captured. Next slide, please. Participants in the Building Energy Disclosure Project receive a personal energy performance scorecard per building registered on a yearly basis. Included on the Energy Performance Scorecard is the Energy Star score, which is a measure of how well the property is performing relative to similar properties when normalized for climate and operational characteristics. The Energy Star scores are based on data from national building energy consumption surveys, and this allows Portfolio Manager to control for key variables affecting a building's energy performance, including climate, hours of operation, and building size. What this means is that buildings from around the country with different operational parameters and subject to different weather patterns can be compared side by side to see how they stack up in terms of energy performance. The specific factors that are included in this normalization will depend on the property type. The 1 to 100 scale is set so that 1 represents buildings that are not performing as well, and 100 represents the best performing buildings. A score of 50 would indicate that a building is performing at the national median, considering its size, location, and operational parameters. A score of 75 indicates that a property is performing in the 75th percentile and may be eligible for Energy Star certification. The BEDP does not facilitate the certification process. There are building types that do not fall under those eligible for an Energy Star score. For those buildings, weather normalized site energy use intensity is utilized as a comparative metric. Site energy is the annual amount of all of the energy a property consumes on site, regardless of the source. It includes energy purchased from the grid or in bulk, as well as renewable energy generated and consumed on site, such as from solar. Site energy can be used to understand how the energy use for an individual property has changed over time. Weather normalized site energy is the energy use the property would have consumed during 30-year average conditions. Weather normalization can be helpful as the value helps understand changes in energy when accounting for changes in weather. Overall, the site energy use intensity is the site energy use divided by the property square foot. Greenhouse gases emissions are also included on the scorecard. GHG emissions are the carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide gases released into the atmosphere as a result of energy consumption at a property. Emissions are reported in 4 different categories, including direct, indirect, biomass, and total emissions. Next slide, please. One of the key functions of the project is to make benchmark data from participants available to the city, to other participants, and to the public. The Building Energy Disclosure Project information and metrics are shared on the City of Winnipeg's Open Data Portal. These are available for download and include building details such as the property name, address, building category, property type, property gross floor area, year built, as well as energy performance metrics such as weather normalized site energy use intensity, GHG emissions intensity, and Energy Star score where applicable. There's also a searchable disclosure map on the City of Winnipeg's website that displays these same metrics, while also allowing for the option to filter by some of the described building criteria. Next slide, please. As a creation of the province, the City of Winnipeg is bound by provincial legislation, including the City of Winnipeg Charter Act. Section 224 of the Charter provides that the city must, by bylaw, adopt a development plan. Our Winnipeg 2045 is the city's development plan, which sets a vision for the next 25 years. Our Winnipeg includes an updated target of net zero emissions by 2050 in alignment with federal and international targets. This replaces the original Winnipeg Climate Action Plan target of an 80% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions compared to 2011 levels. The climate action target of a 20% reduction in GHG emissions by 2030 relative to 2011 levels remains the same. Our Winnipeg 2045 was given 3rd reading and approved by Council on May 26, 2022. Next slide, please. The purpose of the Community Energy Investment Roadmap, CER, is to identify city and community-wide systems-level actions and investments required to achieve emissions reductions targets as outlined in the Winnipeg Climate Action Plan, as well as additional actions that will be necessary to meet the Our Winnipeg 2045 target of net zero emissions by 2050. This technical analysis identifies actions and investments to decarbonize the city. However, it does not specify policies, resources, or mechanisms to operationalize these actions. The CER can be used to inform the development of strategic city policies, infrastructure plans, and investments by establishing targets and objectives for each sector. It provides modeled annual GHG emissions against which progress can be tracked. Additionally, it may represent an economic development roadmap for the city by identifying opportunities for new and existing businesses. The report highlights the costs and benefits of each actions, laying a foundation for the development of regulations, policies, and incentives to prioritize and accelerate action. And I'm now going to hand it over to my colleague Melanie, who will be starting the next part of the presentation off by talking about Energy Star Portfolio Manager at the City of Winnipeg.
So, hi everybody. So I'm going to change track a little bit. However, I'm going to go into how we get information for the city-owned buildings on their energy use and also their carbon emissions. So what the city uses is Energy Star Portfolio Manager, and you can see a screenshot of that on the screen. We have 492 buildings, which isn't all the buildings that the City of Winnipeg owns. However, it is most of the major ones. In total, the city it's roughly about 1,500. So yeah, as I was saying, not quite all. However, it does highlight the ones that have the most important information. So the types of buildings that are included in Portfolio Manager that we have, so it's anywhere from any type of building from arenas, we have community centres, we have offices, libraries, and we're also included in Energy Star Portfolio is the transit garages and also the sewage treatment plants and the pumping stations as well. So what we do is we keep track of all these energy users and also what are our top emitters. So when I'm talking about emitters, I'm really referring to the greenhouse gas emissions that come from buildings. And here in Manitoba, as some of you probably already know, our electricity is produced from hydro, so it has a very low greenhouse gases associated with that. So really, when we're talking about emitters in Manitoba, we're talking about buildings that use natural gas and how much natural gas that they use. So at the City of Winnipeg, here are the types of buildings that are in our top 20. So we have, for instance, as you can see here from the graph, we have 4 of our indoor pools that are in our top 20. We do have a couple of offices, some community centres. But what is surprising to me, and what I was really surprised to find out when I started here at the city, is that pumping stations and also the sewage treatment works are included in those top 20 emitters. So in the case of the sewage treatment plants, the way that they use natural gas is that the process that is involved in the sewage breakdown means that that sewage has to be heated to quite high temperatures. So that is what is using the natural gas in that case, is to really provide the heating to that. And then in the case of the pumping stations, this is where the water is distributed around the city to all the areas that it is obviously needed. Most of our pumps that do that are electricity based, but there are some older pumps that do use natural gas, and indeed they have to use natural gas just in case the electricity goes down in that pumping station, just to ensure continuity of service. So another thing that we use Portfolio Manager for, or I should say the main thing that we use Portfolio Manager for, is to track energy use. And this allows the city to see which buildings have a higher than average use. Energy use as well. So for instance, I'm giving the example here of the P.Eng indoor pool. So you can see here that it does have pretty steady natural gas rates and electricity rates as well. However, what I have done in the bottom left-hand corner is just put on a Canadian average, which is 1.55 gigajoules per meter squared, and then put on what the Pan Am energy use is in real life, which is 2.55 gigajoules per meter squared. So you can see it is quite a lot higher than the national average. There are a few reasons for that. So first of all, it is an older facility. It was built in the late 1960s, so it is getting on a bit now. Also, our mechanical systems are on the older side, unfortunately. And number one reason is that there is currently no heat recovery in the pool. So the fresh air that comes in during the winter has to be heated right from the temperature of the outside air to what is needed in the pool, which, as you can understand, is quite a big swing. However, using this information, we can see what we need to do in order to lower that energy use. So some of the drawbacks of Portfolio Manager include that it doesn't measure demand. So electricity demand is the measurement of electricity use. So it's actually how much electricity is that building using. This differs in comparison to energy, because energy is actually the use of electricity over a certain time period. So energy units are kilowatt hours, whereas demand is measured in kilowatts. So it is really unfortunate that we don't get that information from Portfolio Manager, because we don't know that peak electricity use. We just know the electricity use over a certain time period. Another issue that we sometimes have is the billing issues. As you can imagine, we get a large bill because we have so many city-owned buildings here. And so, of course, there are going to be billing issues that come up on some buildings in any one month. This includes maybe where a building has been left off, or maybe the dates are wrong. So because Portfolio Manager is an automatic download, this does cause problems. As you can see from the screenshot here at the top of the slide, you can see, for instance, a problem here where it's noting that there is an overlap of 28 days. So this can skew the data on occasion. So it's something to really be aware of. Another problem is that no taxes are included on the utility costs. So Portfolio Manager does have base utility costs, but unfortunately, because taxes are not included, it's not the true measurement of what we actually have to pay. One of the really great things about Portfolio Manager is that you can pick up issues just by tracking and monitoring the data. So here is an example of the Bonnie Battelle indoor pool. As you can see here, as with the Pan Am, the natural gas and the electricity has been steady for a number of years. You can see, though, that in 2020 and the first bit of 2021, the natural gas does go up and down, and that is due to COVID and the closures of the pool. However, you can see when the pool is reopened full time from 2022, you can see that there is a spike in natural gas. Now, it is important to remember that there was a colder winter last winter. However, this is a very big spike in natural gas. And on seeing this data, when it was looked into, we discovered that the heat recovery unit at the pool wasn't functioning as it should be. So we were able to go back and make sure that it was fixed and functioning properly. So this just illustrates one of the ways that it's really useful tracking data. Another good thing that it can be used for is predicting future energy, carbon, and utility costs. So in this example here is for the St. James Civic Centre renovation and expansion. At the moment, the renovation has just been completed, but the expansion is still to come. However, before any of that took place, we were able to look into a portfolio manager for similar buildings, and it just gave us the option to be able to predict the electricity and natural gas consumption that we may see in the future, and be able to predict how much the city will have to spend on those utility costs. So one thing I want to mention is that although we are planning to continue using Energy Star Portfolio Manager, there is a potential option for us to also use RETScreen as well. The same with Portfolio Manager. RETScreen is a program. It was developed by the federal government, and again, it automatically tracks energy data. In this case, the same as Portfolio Manager, it tracks the electricity and natural gas in its particular associated units. However, in RETScreen, it automatically predicts the carbon emissions as well, and it does also measure or track the demand, the electricity demand, which is really helpful. Another good thing about moving some of this data or replicating it in RETScreen as well is that RETScreen has the option to actually build energy models of existing buildings and try out different energy efficiency projects, just so you can get an idea of how to save the maximum amount of energy and carbon emissions. So it's a great all-round tool, and it's something that we are looking into at the moment. So moving on, I want to have a chat now about the recommissioning and retrocommissioning efforts that we have going on at the city at the moment, because it definitely does feed in to the measurement and analysis of our energy and carbon use. So just as a refresher, recommissioning and retrocommissioning is a systematic process for improving an existing building's performance. It uses investigation to identify problems. The primary focus is identifying low-cost operational and maintenance improvements, and recommissioning and retrocommissioning may be done alone or with a retrofit project. Also, I should say that recommissioning is performed on existing buildings that were originally commissioned when built, and retrocommissioning is performed on existing buildings that have not been commissioned initially. So here at the City of Winnipeg, because a lot of our buildings were built in the 60s and 70s and also 80s, all of those buildings in pretty much 99% of the cases were not originally commissioned. So what we're actually doing now at the city is classed as retro commissioning. So what changes typically occur over time in a building? And this can be over short time periods or over decades. So sometimes scheduling, for instance, can change. When are those lights being turned off and on? The building temperature set points. You'll have occupants want to change those set points to what they prefer. And sometimes this causes the building to run as it shouldn't be. Supply air temperatures. Sometimes the building has had demand control ventilation put into it, but that means it has a knock-on effect of the overall equipment running. Again, the airflows could have changed, static pressure, and also obviously over time there's going to be a quick equipment failure and replacement, which again changes how the building runs. And then these last two are kind of should be put together, building renovations and change in building use. So maybe the building has a different use than what it was originally built for, and therefore the building systems could be optimized to make sure that everything is running as it should be. So where are we today in the city of Winnipeg, and just keeping an eye on things. So here at the city, we're using a system called Metasys. Metasys is run by Johnson Controls. Now, slowly but surely, all of our buildings are being moved over to this system. You can see from the screenshot here, we have aquatics and arenas and libraries, municipal buildings, transit facilities, water and waste, and the Winnipeg police station on this system. And so what this has allowed us to do is really keep an eye on things, and also discover what buildings really need retro commissioning. And here on this slide, it shows what has been done so far. So at the moment, this process is pretty new. We've almost done 6 buildings, which are here all around the city. Now, these 6 buildings aren't necessarily our biggest emitters or our biggest buildings that use the most energy. However, they have been chosen because they have been recognized as buildings that really need that tuning up. So here is what has been done so far. So you can see mostly it has been the HVAC ECM, and ECM is the energy conservation measure strategies that have been added, but there are still some that need to be completed. And then on the Winnipeg Fire and Paramedic Service, there has been some HVAC ECM strategies added, and also some office LED lights and outside lights. So although these buildings haven't been fully completed, we have done a prediction of results that we expect to see. So we expect to see 32% energy savings and 30% cost savings and 27% carbon savings. So you can really see how important retro commissioning is. And here are some graphs for some of the predicted simple paybacks. Here's the HVAC one. You can see here that we are spending $117,000. However, this will pay back really quickly. In 3.5 years, we expect to be making savings. And again, here on the lighting, we have an even better payback. We're spending $250,000. However, we do expect that to be paid back in just 2.7 years, which is fantastic. So how much carbon is being saved from retro commissioning these 6 buildings? So it is the equivalent of roughly 32 vehicles being driven for 1 year. It's the equivalent of 368,000 miles. Apologies, the data here that I got was from a US website, so it's not kilometer, it's set in miles. It's equivalent to 18.7 homes and over 18 million smartphones being charged. So what we have also done as part of the project, and something that we have done from using Energy Start Portfolio Manager, is that we have actually kept an eye on the project results, so we can see actual results rather than just predicted data. So you can see here for 1057 Logan Avenue project, where it was lighting and some of the HVAC ECMs applied. So the average energy use before the project was just over 20,000 kilowatt hours. And then after the project, there was an average energy use of just over 10,000 kilowatt hours. So you can see there has been quite a bit of actual savings, which is great. So where do we want to be? So in the future, we have 6 more buildings lined up. These are going to be the next to do. And of course, this is going to be a continual rollout. So after these 6 buildings, there will be even more. So the 6 new locations, and then the St. John's Leisure Centre and St. Vital Library will hopefully be the next 2. So now I just want to go in a bit deeper to the building management system that we use. So as I mentioned before, we use the Metasys system, which is run by Johnson Controls. And I've gone through these before, so I won't repeat them. But these are the types of buildings that we actually monitor at the moment. And we are slowly but surely moving all of the buildings over to this. So one good thing about the Metasys system is that you can actually go in and you can do this remotely as well. You can go in and check actual set point data. So you can see here, just as an example, this is 185 King, which is offices, and it will give information on like loop temperatures, the supply fans, the indoor temperature set points. And if you actually click on those screens, it will drill down and give you very specific set points, as you can see there on the right hand side. And it's pretty obvious if anything has been turned off or is going into the alarm status. One of the nice things about this system as well is that you can bring up trending data on particular set points. So here on the bottom left hand side is an example of a VAV actually at the Millennium Library, where we are monitoring just what the temperature is in the space. So you can see how overnight the temperature goes down and then it's starting to heat up during the daytime. So it is acting as it should be in this case, but it's ideal to monitor when we think that there might be issues. So we do have plans for the future, though, for extra monitoring. What we have done is that a software called SkySpark has been purchased. Now, this is again from I think Johnson Controls, and what this program does is it automatically analyzes building energy and equipment data to identify the issues and the faults, deviations, and correlations. And the exciting part of this is that it will automatically analyze this. So at the moment in Energy Star Portfolio Manager, what is happening is that we are actually having to go into each building and manually look at the data to see what is going on, to see if there are any issues. But with this program, it will do that for you, and then it will notify you if it can see anything going on. So in the case, for instance, of the Bonnie Vital, SkySpark would actually send us a notification rather than us having to go in and do that ourselves. So here you can see a screenshot of what it is doing. And I should say as well, it measures demand, which is what the screenshot is showing here, which is another fantastic feature. So at the moment, we have 6 buildings that are just being tested out. And you can see here that it is measuring the actual energy use of those buildings. So we can see that what is going on, what is happening in real time, and then it is also notifying us as well. So before I end, I want to go through some conclusions to wrap up our presentation. So monitoring and analysis is key to evaluating trends and inefficient behaviors. It can assist in identifying potential issues with building equipment and facilities. So for instance, abnormal energy spikes, irregularities in consumption or offline equipment. When changes are made to a building, such as a retrofit or modification of operational schedules, which is what we were talking about in the retro commissioning that we're doing, monitoring can determine actual energy and cost savings. Retro commissioning and building measurement is part of the city's continuous improvement plan. And the good thing is that the savings generated can be reinvested in the program. So we continue to do that more and more. And then lastly, I would just like to point out that monitoring and analysis is essential to supporting the Winnipeg Climate Action Plan, our Winnipeg 2045, and the Community Energy Investment Roadmap, otherwise known as CEAR. So with that, I would like to thank you very much for listening in to our presentation. And if you have any questions, myself and Janelle would be very happy to answer them.
Perfect. Thanks, Janelle and Melanie, for your presentation. It is such a great pleasure to see the plans and the project to continue to develop our city in the future. So for our audience, if you have any question you'd like to ask, please type them in the chat. So the first question I have for you both is that how often should you carry out recommissioning?
So I can answer that one. Basically, the answer is it depends. So if you have a building, for instance, that hasn't ever been commissioned, then it's a good idea to carry out that retro commissioning. If you have a building that has been commissioned in the past and is fairly new, you may want to wait a few years just so that it's worth the money that you're going to spend. In addition, if you have a building where you know something has changed, or maybe you know that it hasn't been well maintained in the past, then I would say it's always a good idea to look into that retro commissioning or recommissioning.
Do you have any comments on that, Janelle?
No, I think Melanie summed that up pretty well.
Perfect. The next question I have is that how can you use measured data to understand the best energy saving and carbon reduction opportunities?
So I would say on this one, and just to give an example of how we are using it at the city, is obviously there's examples that I've used in the presentation, but another thing that we are doing is that we are actually looking into building like a typical building type. So an example of that is an arena. Lots of our arenas are pretty much the same or similar because they were built in the same era. So what we can do is we can build an energy model of a typical arena. But the really good thing about having measured data already is that we can calibrate that energy model. So we can make sure that it's set at the right baseline. And then we can use that model to figure out what is the best energy saving measures that can be applied to it. So for instance, maybe replacing the heating units in the spectators area for a more efficient unit, then we can test that out in the energy model so we know what works and what doesn't work when it comes to actually carrying out a project. So that's one of the ways that it's really handy to have actual measured data.
Yep, so thank you for your answer. And I have another question for you right here from Christopher. So can you explain a little how a backup natural gas generator at a pump station which would run very infrequently be compared against a treatment plant which use gas continuously?
So in terms of the pumping station, most of the pumps are electrical, so they use electricity to run. However, we do, I think it's a couple of our pumping stations, it's not a generator, it's an actual natural gas motor. And that's installed just in case there is a power outage, because obviously it's extremely important to keep water flowing around the city of Winnipeg, even in a power outage. So yeah, that's when that would run. Also, it is also run in terms of normal operation, just to make sure that if there is that power outage, that it can run properly. It's not like it's been sitting there for ages. And then in terms of using natural gas at the treatment plant, most of that natural gas usage, as I explained in the presentation, does come from the processes that are used to break down that sewage. Now, really interestingly, some of that process, the process to break down the sewage does produce methane, which the City of Winnipeg also uses in its boilers to then further heat more sewage. However, we do need to use a little bit extra natural gas as well. So hopefully that has explained the question.
Yeah, that sounds good. I think Glenn has a question for you right here. Can you compare and contrast between the electric heat versus natural gas, the cost versus GHG emission?
I can take this one to start.
Actually, would you mind kind of explain what is GHG is for someone who's not really knowing what it is?
Yeah, no worries. GHG stands for greenhouse gas. And so Glenn, just to answer your question, the Community and Energy Investment Roadmap this year, we do break this down in our modeling. So there's 3 different scenarios that are modeled in this year document. There's the business as usual, business as planned, and the net zero scenario. So I'd be happy to share that in the chat so that you're able to look at the figures for that a little further. Melanie, was there anything else that you wanted to add to that?
I was just going to say, I mean, like in Manitoba, the electricity, because it is produced from hydro, has extremely low GHG emissions, whereas our natural gas, which we mainly use for heating because it is a cold climate here, that has obviously GHG emissions attached to it. However, there is the thing here in Manitoba where obviously electricity does cost more than natural gas. So it's difficult sometimes to justify the cost of projects that make that transition from natural gas to electricity. However, the good thing is when we are making the transition to electricity, often those types of equipment that use electricity are more efficient than the natural gas. And also, as people have probably noticed, that the cost of natural gas is rising and rising due to like global issues that are going on, and then added carbon tax. So there is likely to be some crossover with electricity and natural gas costs for a lot of these types of projects somewhere in the next 5 to 10 years. So lots of these things will become much more economically attractive as time goes on.
Great, thank you for your answer. And for anyone who is interested in the graphs and the figures, is that winnipeg.ca/sustainability/CEIR.stm. Another link is at winnipeg.ca/documents/CEIR/CEIR.report.pdf. Here I have another question for you from Leo. So have you done any building envelope related upgrade? For example, installation upgrade. If you do you have any data available to share?
So I can take this one again. So I know we have done some projects. However, they have been I would say minimal at the moment compared to some of like the necessary equipment upgrades and structural upgrades that we've had to do at the city. So at the moment, we don't have any data specific to envelope upgrades where that's all we've done in a building. So it's kind of, at the moment, it's hard to separate out those results, I would say, but hopefully we will have some examples as time goes on. So yeah, I would say we've definitely got some projects in the pipeline that have envelope upgrades to them, but we don't have any specific data to share at the moment.
Thank you, Melanie, for the answer. Another question from our audience says, how did you account for the reduction in energy due to the COVID-19 lockdown in 2020, rather than a result of the retrofits in your saving findings?
So in the example that I gave where recommissioning was carried out, that particular building was occupied throughout COVID. So it was kind of a business as usual. So that was really easy to do that. But yeah, it's absolutely right. It's really difficult with COVID now because the last 2 years of data are, depending on the building type, it's really difficult to do a comparison. So what we've done here in some scenarios is actually have to go back further in the data. So instead of looking at 2020 and 2021, we've been looking at 2018 and 2019 to do a comparison. But yeah, that's definitely been a challenge for us to understand energy savings with all the COVID stuff mixed in as well. And it will be ongoing because, like, for instance, in an office setting, people are usually doing hybrid working at the moment. There's not full capacity. So yeah, again, really difficult to do comparisons at the moment.
And for the community energy investment roadmap, we have an acknowledgement page in the document, just acknowledging the pandemic and sort of the issues related to that in the modeling, but the modeling doesn't include specific changes to reflect like changes in work, travel, and lifestyle.
Yeah, it would be very interesting to see the future data, to compare with from then and then to this period. Here's the question I have for you. So how many of the buildings in the program being tracked are older versus the new buildings? What benefits are there to track a new building built to a new energy code?
I'm not entirely sure which program. I assume the building disclosure program, or I'm not entirely sure.
Maybe Energy Star?
Yeah.
Christopher, are you able to clarify what program you're referring to?
So the program is your tracking of city building energy use.
So I would say we're tracking all of the major buildings, whether they're older or newer. What benefits are there to tracking a new build? I mean, the benefits are we can see like how a building that has been built to the new energy code does perform against older buildings. And I mean, typically the newer buildings are better controlled, although I would say a caveat, sometimes they can have more complicated systems, and if they are not commissioned properly or maintained properly, then sometimes that can lead to problems for sure. So yeah, I think it'll be really interesting once the newer energy code comes in, the NECB 2020, because at the moment we're like in the province, we're still working off the 2011 National Energy Building Code. And to be honest, we've kind of got to a point where that's just standard practice. So really, it will be interesting when we're pushing things a bit further and see what results that has.
Great, thank you for your answer. I think Glenn has a question for you right here. So new energy code is very strict, so compared to all the design. So are new buildings getting the controls included?
Yeah, all new buildings, city-owned buildings, definitely get controls, and there's a lot of conversation with the consultants who are designing the buildings, with our in-house controls guys, so making sure that those systems marry up to existing buildings systems, sorry, and so they're talking to each other. So yeah, it's we're quite careful when it comes to new builds that we're making sure that those controls are operating how they should be.
Awesome, thank you. I think, and this might be the last question for you that we have here. So when you come up with the plans and then, all the codes, is there a big city that you compare with so that we can come up with that codes? If so, which city is that? Would you care to disclose?
Janelle, do you want to answer this one? Because I know you've been looking into this recently.
Yeah, so I usually look at, city of Vancouver and city of Toronto as sort of the forward-thinking leaders in a lot of the green building research that I do. But of course, we also look at smaller jurisdictions that might compare in climate to Winnipeg, such as Edmonton, Calgary. Those are sort of the main ones I look at. But yeah, always open to looking at all jurisdictions that are relevant.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. And I think that's all the question I have for you, Janelle and Melanie. I would like to thank you again for joining us today. Before we wrap up this session, would you have any comment?
I would just like to thank everybody who joined this presentation. It's really great for me and Janelle to be able to share what we're doing at the City of Winnipeg, because I think a lot of it is hidden, so people might not know what's going on and what we're trying to do. So yeah, thanks to everybody.
Perfect. And for you, Janelle?
Yeah, I would just echo what Melanie had to say. Thanks for coming out to our presentation this morning, and hope to see you all soon.
Thank you for watching. Visit the Ingenium On Demand library for more exclusive content.